I was sitting in the small kitchen in Maplewood, a place that felt more like a prison than a home. The air smelled of cheap coffee and failure. Across from me was my 16-year-old son, Matty, and the look in his eyes was one I'll never forget. It was ice cold, full of shame and anger directed right at me. He leaned in, his voice cutting like broken glass. "You're the reason we're poor, Dad. Mom was right to leave you." His words slammed into my chest. My hands started shaking, spilling the coffee from my mug. My ex-wife, Jane, stood by the doorway. I saw a quick, ugly smirk flash on her face, and I knew she had fed him those lines. I wanted to yell, to defend my years of hard work, but the pain was too deep. I just sat there, silent, broken. I felt like every effort I ever made to provide for him had been twisted into a joke by the only people who mattered. Matty didn't wait. He spun around and slammed the back door, leaving me alone with Jane's silent triumph. That's when my cheap phone started to vibrate on the counter. It was a New York number, one I hadn't seen or thought about in 20 years. If you're watching this, subscribe, like and let me know where you're watching from. I stared at the unfamiliar number, my heart suddenly thumping. The name on the screen was Ashwood and Tate. I answered, my voice rough and uncertain. "Hello?" A sharp, clear voice replied, belonging to a woman named Gina Voss. She said she was a lawyer and needed me in New York immediately. "It concerns the estate of Edward Tate," she explained. I froze. Edward Tate was my uncle, my mother's brother, a man who had made billions but had disowned me years ago. He told me I was a disgrace and never wanted to see my face again. Why would his lawyer be calling me now? I thought perhaps he had left me a cruel joke or a bill for some old debt, but the urgency in her tone felt real. I pressed Gina for details, but she was strictly professional. "I can only discuss the matter face-to-face, Mr. Hunt. It is urgent. We've booked your ticket for tomorrow." As I hung up, my mind was racing. I looked over and saw Jane's eyes narrowed, her casual smirk replaced by a look of sharp greed. I knew instantly she was already trying to figure out how to use this. The tension at dinner that night was thick enough to choke on. I tried one last time to reach Matty, to tell him I was going to New York for something important, but Jane jumped in first. She dismissed the call as me chasing fantasies. "Poor Moses is just desperate, Matty," she sneered, making me sound pathetic. "He's going to beg his dead, rich uncle's lawyers for some spare change. He'll come back tomorrow even more of a joke." Matty just stared at me, his face full of disgust. "You're pathetic, Dad," he repeated, and those words hurt worse than any physical blow. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised with love and sacrifice, and realized how much Jane had poisoned his mind against me. The atmosphere was so heavy with their disapproval that I could barely breathe. I saw how easily Matty believed the worst about me, and it felt like a final defeat. I couldn't stay in that house a moment longer, breathing in their judgment and resentment. My decision was final, I would leave right away. I didn't need their flights or their approval. I was going to New York, and I was going alone. I needed to escape the failure that was my life in Maplewood. I drove all night, the long miles giving me too much time to think about all my mistakes. When I finally arrived in Manhattan, I felt like a dusty ghost. The building housing Ashwood and Tate was a skyscraper of glass and marble, totally different from my world of drywall and cement. I felt out of place in my worn jacket and tired truck. A silent receptionist led me to the office of Gina Voss. She was elegant and calm, and she didn't waste time on small talk. She confirmed that Edward Tate had passed away. Then, she slid a thick, expensive-looking envelope across the desk. "Mr. Hunt," she said, her voice serious, "Mr. Tate left this sealed letter for you only." I grabbed it, my hands shaking. I could feel the weight of 20 years of silence in that envelope. I tried to prepare myself for another cold rejection, maybe a final harsh word from beyond the grave, but I couldn't look away from the mystery. Gina then reached into her desk drawer and placed something heavy and ornate on the marble surface, a brass key. She looked straight into my eyes and said with total seriousness, "This changes everything about your life." I tore open the letter, my vision blurry. It was my Uncle Edward's handwriting, formal yet full of regret. He wrote that he had been too proud to admit he was wrong to cut me out. He apologized for his stubbornness and confessed he had always regretted our argument. I could barely breathe as I read the last part. I, Moses Hunt, was the sole heir to his entire fortune. Gina confirmed the number, a staggering $267 million and a controlling stake in the Tate Corporation. I, the failure, the poor man, was now richer than I could ever imagine. The shock was so immense it felt like a physical blow. The shame Maddie and Jane had loaded onto me shattered, replaced by an impossible destiny. Tears finally fell, not from sorrow, but from the sudden, powerful knowledge that my uncle had believed in me when no one else did. The years of feeling worthless vanished in that moment. But Gina quickly brought me back to earth. "Others may contest this, Mr. Hunt," she warned, her voice suddenly tense. "The top executives expected the money. They already know and are moving against you." Back in Maplewood, I knew Jane wasn't sitting still. She'd always been a scavenger, and now she smelled meat. Since I hadn't called, she started digging. She found the news of Edward Tate's death and instantly started feeding lies to Maddie. "Your father is stealing, Maddie. He's a liar who will only embarrass us," she must have told him. She painted me as desperate and criminal. Then, she called Gina Voss, pretending to be the supportive wife, trying to get details about the inheritance. Gina, thankfully, was cautious. But Jane heard enough to confirm her suspicions. This was big money. She saw her second chance, not with love, but with pure, simple greed. She wouldn't let millions slip through her fingers again. She made her move quickly. She packed a small bag, told Maddie a lie about visiting a friend far away, and took off. Her plan was clear: she was following me to New York. She wasn't asking for a share, she was going to demand it. I felt a dizzying mix of hope and fear as I went back to Gina's office the next morning to sign the inheritance papers. The moment I lifted the pen, the door burst open. It was Jane, breathless and furious. She had found me. "I demand a share, Moses," she yelled, ignoring Gina completely. "For Maddie. He deserves a better life, and you owe us." Her greed was ugly, raw, and desperate. I looked at her, and all the residual feeling I had for her just died. "No, Jane," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You left when you thought I had nothing. You get nothing now that I have everything." She screamed and raged until the building security had to escort her out. I felt a strange calm, realizing that even with the money, I wouldn't trade my peace for her chaos. As the guards pulled her away, Gina quickly reached out and slipped a folded note into my hand. It was a short, sharp order: "Do not go home tonight." I followed Gina's warning and hid out in a quiet, simple hotel in a forgettable part of Manhattan. Later that evening, she met me there, looking over her shoulder the whole time. The news she gave me next made my blood run cold. She told me the truth about my uncle. Edward Tate had been murdered. The death was made to look like a heart attack, but Gina's own investigators found foul play. She explained that someone high up in the Tate Corporation had been stealing millions and knew Edward was about to expose them. When the killer found out I was the sole heir, I instantly became the new target. My quiet life as a contractor was over. I was now caught in a deadly game of corporate deception and greed. Gina's eyes were full of worry as she leaned closer and whispered a name that hit me like a punch: "The executive who ordered the murder and the theft is Derek Vaughn. And he is the man Jane has been seeing." It was like a dark puzzle snapping together. I suddenly understood everything: Jane's sudden confidence, the way she had poisoned Maddie, the cruel timing of her leaving me. Derek Vaughn, the rich executive, had used Jane's unhappiness and my own financial stress as his tools. He had convinced her to leave me, making me look like a pathetic loser who couldn't handle his life. The whole point was to make me seem unstable so that when Edward died, Derek could challenge the will and take the company himself. Jane was nothing but a disposable pawn in a corporate murder plot. I felt sick realizing that Jane hadn't just abandoned me, she had been recruited to help destroy me and secure a killer's fortune. The betrayal was complete and total, coming from every direction that was supposed to represent love and family. As Gina spoke, I walked over to the window. I pulled the curtain aside just a tiny bit, and the terrifying thought hit me, they were watching me. My new fortune was a death sentence. The corporate attack on me was brutal and fast. Overnight, all the Tate Corporation accounts were frozen. Derek's cronies on the board claimed I was a fraud and the will was fake. Then, the media went wild. Stories were leaked everywhere saying I was an ex-con who had forged the will and was trying to steal from a dead man. Reporters were everywhere, hounding me, turning my life into a circus. I tried calling Matty, wanting desperately to explain the truth, but he refused to pick up. He finally sent me a short text. "I told you you were a liar, Dad. Leave us alone." I could handle the frozen accounts, but Matty's scorn was the real weapon that cut me down. It felt like I had lost him forever. I felt like I was sinking again. Gina was frantic. "We can prove you are innocent, Moses," she said. "We have the evidence of the murder. But to use it, we have to drag your son into the public eye. We risk putting Matty's safety on the line by exposing everything." While the world was closing in, Gina and I pored over the thick, old will. We were looking for any legal loophole, any detail we missed. Then, Gina spotted it, a hidden clause. It was written in complex language, but the meaning was clear. The $267 million was conditional. The heir could only claim the fortune if they proved not just business smarts but deep moral integrity under extreme pressure. The clause stated that the heir had to show a willingness to forgive and protect family, even when that family had hurt them the most. Edward Tate had anticipated the greed of the executives and the betrayal of Jane. He had built a final, impossible test. My Uncle Edward hadn't left me money, he had left me a test of character. I stared at the words, realizing the cruel irony. To win this massive fortune, I had to save the very people Jane and Matty who had publicly destroyed me. I had to help the people who had betrayed me to prove I was worthy. I didn't have much time to think. Fate stepped in and forced my choice. The news broke that Matty had been caught shoplifting with a group of friends, one of whom was Derek Vaughn's stepson. It was a clear setup by Derek to discredit me and Matty. Social media was instantly alight with photos and headlines calling my son a criminal. The phone rang, and it was Jane, sobbing hysterically. She begged me to help. "They'll ruin him, Moses. You have to fix this. Please, he's your son." I listened to her desperate voice, knowing she had brought this pain on herself, but I couldn't ignore the terror in her tone or the fear for my boy. I felt the weight of the moral integrity clause crushing down on me. I had a choice: I could ignore them both, let Jane and Derek's twisted plot consume them, and finally be free of their burden. Or, I could be the father and the man my uncle wanted me to be. I had to decide whether to save them, or walk away forever. I knew what I had to do. I drove straight to the police station. I handled the paperwork, paid the bail, and kept my head high, ignoring the stares of the officers who recognized me from the news. The second I walked out, the media descended, shouting questions about my criminal son. I calmly shielded Matty and took the public humiliation without answering a single question. Matty, looking small and utterly defeated, stood beside me, confused and deeply ashamed. He couldn't understand why the man he called a failure was the one standing up for him. I didn't care what the reporters printed, I only cared that Matty was safe and, for the first time, seeing my actions instead of Jane's lies. As we drove away, Gina's secret contact managed to send me a new piece of evidence, a grainy video. It was a recording of Derek Vaughn, drunk and boasting, detailing the entire plot, how he set me up, how he used Jane, and his plan to frame me and take the estate. The video was the key, but it was not enough. Gina and I immediately got to work. She traced the leak and the stolen funds back to a secure, hidden server deep within the Tate Corporation's network. Using my contractor skills, I'd installed communication lines for businesses years ago. We managed to breach the corporate firewalls remotely. We found an encrypted file that broke the whole case open. The files proved Derek Vaughn's massive embezzlement and, more shockingly, provided clear evidence that Edward Tate's heart attack was a staged murder meant to cover up the entire fraud. The full weight of Derek's evil was finally revealed. We had the smoking gun to expose the killer. We had done it. I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. But the next morning, my relief turned to horror. I called Gina, and her phone was dead. I drove to her hideout, and she was gone. I found Gina's temporary office completely cleaned out. The silence in the room screamed danger. I immediately checked the building's private security cameras. The footage confirmed my darkest fear: Derek Vaughn's men had grabbed her. They wore masks, but I recognized the car and their brutal movements. They took my lawyer, my only connection to the outside world. I knew Derek realized we were close to exposing him. He was desperate. The sight of the security footage Gina being roughly handled filled me with a cold, protective rage. He had crossed a line, and now the game was personal. Just as I was about to call the police, a text message came in from an untraceable phone. It was short and terrifying: "Back off, or Maddie gets hurt next. You lose everything, including your son." I didn't care about the money anymore. I didn't care about the will. I only cared about my son. I had to get back to Maplewood and protect him. I drove straight through the day and night, rushing back to Maplewood. I burst into my house, frantic, and found Maddie on the couch, still sulking but safe. "Maddie, we have to leave right now," I pleaded, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. But he was still defensive. "Stop, Dad. You're just trying to scare me with your fake stories," he shouted, pushing me away. I saw the suspicion in his eyes, and it hurt that he still doubted me after everything. I knew I had seconds to change his mind. Just as the words left his mouth, a loud, black car screeched to a halt outside. Two massive, dangerous men got out and started moving toward the door. I shoved Maddie behind the sofa right before the front door was kicked open. Derek's men had tracked me. The sheer violence of the invasion finally shattered Maddie's resistance. I fought them off with everything I had, fueled by a father's primal rage. I managed to force them out and lock the door, breathing heavily. Maddie, shaking and terrified, looked at the door, then at me. He finally saw Derek's true, terrifying colors. The immediate danger had passed, but the fear was still thick in the air. Jane came stumbling out of her room, her face white with terror. She had heard the men yelling Derek's name and realized the terrible truth. She looked at me, then at our terrified son, and her resistance finally broke. "It's true, isn't it?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Derek used me. He never cared about me." She collapsed onto a chair and confessed everything. She told me how Derek had manipulated her, promising her a life free of the struggles I couldn't escape. She admitted she only wanted a better life for Maddie. I watched her brokenness and realized I didn't hate her anymore, I just pitied the choices she made. My focus quickly returned to Gina. Just then, a hidden video feed popped up on my phone. Gina was alive, tied up, but her eyes signaled she was okay. The video showed a countdown. Time was running out. I knew I couldn't just call the police, that would only endanger Gina and turn the whole thing into a bloody shootout. I had one last play, my Uncle Edward's will. Rereading the document, I finally understood the brilliance and the cruelty of the man. Edward had foreseen everything. He knew the family, he knew the greed. He had built a failsafe into the will. The massive fortune would only be officially transferred to my name, and the critical evidence would only be revealed when I made a final, decisive choice. That choice was not revenge, but unconditional forgiveness. The thought of giving up the money to save my soul felt right. It was the only way to prove my uncle was right to trust me. It was a test to see if I valued family and honor more than money. I knew my enemies Derek, Jane, and the greedy executives would only see this choice as weakness. But to satisfy my uncle's final wish, I had to choose love. I had to face Jane and Maddie one last time. The next day, I gathered everyone at Edward's old estate on Long Island. I made sure the media cameras were rolling and the lead lawyer was present. Jane and Maddie stood stiffly on the massive veranda. As the world watched, I faced them. My voice was calm and steady, full of a newfound authority. I forgave them publicly. Jane, Maddie, I said, looking right into the lens. I forgive you for the terrible things you said and the choices you made. You were scared and used. I will always love my son, and I will always protect him. My words were heavy with truth and compassion, a choice that cost me everything and gained me peace. Then, I made the shocking declaration. I looked at the lawyer and the cameras and said, I hereby give up all claim to the $267 million fortune in the hope that it will bring peace to my broken family. The moment the words left my mouth, a loud, clear chime rang out from the lawyer's briefcase. The clause had activated. The world went silent, then exploded. The lawyer, beaming, stepped forward. Mr. Moses Hunt has officially passed the moral integrity test. His selfless act of forgiveness and protection proves him to be the only person worthy of this estate. The lawyer announced that the $267 million fortune was legally mine, and every accusation against me was false. Simultaneously, the police, who had been waiting for the signal, arrested Derek Vaughn, and Gina reappeared, safe. All the lies were exposed. The justice was sweet, but the vindication of my character felt more valuable than all the zeros in the account. The media crowned me a hero. Jane, seeing her whole future evaporate, rushed to me, sobbing and pleading for one last chance. She begged for us to be a family again. I looked at Jane, seeing the desperation in her eyes, but feeling nothing but calm clarity. I spoke softly, but firmly, for all the cameras to hear. I told you. Jane, I have already forgiven you. That is true, and I mean it. I hope you find happiness. I let the moment hang, letting the truth sink in. Then, I delivered the final verdict, but forgiveness is not the same as trust. And it is not the same as a future. We are finished. I turned my back on her. I saw her collapse slightly, realizing that money couldn't buy back what she had so carelessly thrown away, my love and respect. She just stood there, staring at the man who was now a billionaire but still refused her. Then, a quiet voice came from behind me, the only one that truly mattered. Dad, can I come with you? Matty stood there, his eyes red from crying, but his shame replaced by a simple, desperate hope. I turned and pulled my son into a tight hug. It was the moment that mattered, not the money. Matty confessed that he was wrong, that he was spoiled and foolish, and that he wanted to learn how to be a good man again. I agreed. I didn't waste the money on the usual things. Instead, Matty and I started a new life together. We set up a new company in my uncle's honor, called Hunt & Son Holdings. We focused on what mattered, helping struggling families with job training and housing. We decided to turn my uncle's billion-dollar empire into a force for genuine change, something honest and true. Our bond grew stronger every day, built on a foundation of respect and honesty. Weeks later, as Matty was setting up his new office email, he got a mysterious message. It was from Edward Tate's personal assistant, a woman named Alara who we thought had died years ago. She was alive. Ilara's email was brief and full of secrets. She explained that she had been in hiding since Edward's murder. She said the $267 million was just the first layer. The true, untouched legacy was in a final, secret vault only she knew about. The vault didn't hold money, it held letters, videos, and the shocking truth about my own father's disappearance 25 years ago, the event that caused my Uncle Edward and me to fight. This was the missing piece of my life, the deep family secret I'd carried since I was a boy, and I had to see it. Ilara sent me a private access code and a remote address. Driven by a deep need to finally understand the past that had ruined my family, Maddie and I went to the remote location. The massive, thick vault door hissed open. Inside, there was only one small, sealed wooden box. I opened it carefully, my heart pounding with fear and anticipation. I looked inside and gasped at what I saw. Inside the box was a single old memory card. I put it into a small screen that Ilara had left for us. A video started to play. It was my Uncle Edward, looking straight at the camera. "Moses, my boy," he began, his voice surprisingly warm. The money was not the point. It was a test. I needed to know if your heart could survive the betrayal and choose love over revenge. Your father's disappearance was a lie. I forced him into exile to protect him from powerful, dangerous men. The truth about my father's sacrifice made me realize Edward was protecting my entire family, not punishing me. I cut you off so they wouldn't use you to find him. I am truly sorry for the pain I caused. Matty watched beside me, tears running down his face as he learned the truth about his grandfather. Edward finished, "The true fortune is the man you became. Now, go build your legacy." A small note was attached to the screen. It contained one final key to something my uncle called Project Prony. Weeks later, the press conference was huge. Moses Hunt, the man once called a failure, stood tall at the podium with Matty right beside me. Reporters were screaming questions, asking if I would use my billions to seek revenge or aggressively expand my empire. The cameras searched my face, waiting for the expected words of power and greed. I felt the strength of Edward's final message and the love of my son, and I knew exactly what to say. Jane was in the very back, just another face in the crowd, watching the man she had thrown away. I smiled, a genuine, calm smile. They weren't ready for my answer, I knew. I leaned into the microphone. "I'm not rebuilding wealth," I declared clearly. "I'm rebuilding people." I announced that the Tate Corporation would now be a force for good. As the conference ended, Matty and I walked out together, shoulder to shoulder, a united and strong team. The final shot was of the news ticker at the bottom of the screen, reporting the truth for the world to see: Project Prony, a $1 billion humanitarian foundation launched by Moses Hunt. The real legacy was born. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now.